Welcome class, Professor Steve, and this is going to be a relatively brief lesson on on what is the last of the bigger sort of types of upwelling or ways that the deep ocean gets to mix with the surface ocean in sort of a traditional sense. This one's a little less traditional, and we'll see why. But let's remember that the take-home message for this whole unit are mechanisms for breaking the stratification between the deep ocean and the surface ocean um, in what we call upwelling events, which bring nutrients and other things from the deep ocean to the surface to fuel large amounts of primary productivity. Okay, so spring bloom. So first, um, spring blooms are, as you might note from the name, are a seasonal event. Um, and what I mean by seasonal is it only occurs during certain seasons or certain parts of the year, unlike something like equatorial upwelling or the Antarctic upwelling, which occur pretty much throughout the entire year, or coastal upwelling, which depend on episodic events. So events when the wind happen to be blowing in the right direction along a coast. A spring bloom is something that happens with like clockwork, basically around the same time of year, depending on where you are. And these things tend to happen in temperate seas. And what we mean by temperate are these are the ocean parts of the ocean that are in temperate latitudes, which means they have really strong gradient between winter and summer. So really cold winters, really warm summers, and that sort of defines our latitude here in New Jersey. Okay, so in these temperate parts of the ocean, we have essentially two states. We have there's transition in between the two states, obviously, and we'll talk about that too. But the main states that cause the spring blooms, and hopefully you know by now that when I say bloom, I mean phytoplankton bloom, um, are these two states. So we have a winter state, right? So in the temperate winter, the ocean is defined by weaker stratification um, between the surface and the deep ocean, right? So why is that? And you should be thinking ahead here. Why would there be weaker stratification? Well, we have stratification. We have the separate surface ocean because it's warmer, and because it's less dense. Well, in the wintertime, the atmosphere above the surface of the ocean is much colder. The surface of the ocean cools and becomes more dense. Also, in the wintertime, we have strong storms, which causes stronger amounts of mixing and turbulence. So if we cool off the surface ocean and we mix it up in a much stronger way, we get weaker stratification. So there's still a surface ocean, and there's still a deeper, colder, more dense, deep ocean, but the difference between the two becomes less, which means that this barrier is easier to break. And so what we get is mixing down and mixing up from the weaker stratification and the strong storms and turbulence due to wind. We get a breakdown of the stratification, and as we mix down and mix up, we upwell the nutrients into the surface ocean. And there's some other characteristics that go along with that make that not the only thing necessary for our spring bloom. Um, and those characteristics have to do with switching back to what the state is in temperate summer. So in summer we have strong sunlight, right? Longer days, heats up, makes this surface much warmer, much less dense. Um, in the spring we get storms, but into the summer, we get a lot less mixing, and so that strengthens this stratification. And so that is what triggers the spring bloom when we switch from the winter state back to the summer back to the summer state. So in the winter, going into the winter, we have this surface layer. All year long, there's been growth and all the nutrients have been depleted. As we enter this winter state, we get a breakdown of stratification. We get a mixing or an upwelling of the deep water into the surface, brings up the nutrients. Okay, and then as we switch back to the summer state and we get this strong re-stratification, we lock all those nutrients in here. All of a sudden we have a lot of warmth, a lot of sunlight for phytoplankton, and a lot of nutrients, and boom, we trigger our spring bloom. So let's lay it out in its complete succession, right? So here's all of the characteristics that I laid out for you for the winter state. There's less light, it makes it colder, breaks down the stratification, and we have more storms, right? It means colder, deeper, and a less stratified thermocline, right? Just like I showed here, right? The thermocline deepens, and there's less of a difference between this surface and this and the depth. High turbulent mixing, right? So we get this mixing that mixes much deeper and breaks through the thermocline so that we can have nutrients being brought up. The other thing that the high turbulent mixing does, though, is causes high loss to standing stocks. Okay, so that's the other reason. Sorry about that. That's the other reason that just the bringing of nutrients up here is not the only thing necessary for the growth, right? They need sunlight. They need that excess of sunlight from the summer, but they also need standing stock, right? The cells have to be here in great numbers to begin with to begin growth, right? That's one of the reasons phytoplankton are so successful, and we talked about that before the first exam, right? But this high turbulent mixing causes loss of standing stock. The cells that are in the surface ocean, just like the nutrients can be washed up, the cells in the surface ocean can be washed out, okay? But the nutrient-rich waters are mixed up from depth. As we go from spring into summer, right, we get more and more light, less and less storms. So the more light we get, the warmer and shallower the thermocline becomes again, and we get more stratification until finally we have warmth enough to get this strong stratification again. And now we've locked this layer from this layer. We've locked all the cells in here, and now they can grow and begin to repopulate without having that loss of standing stock. Less turbulence, less loss of standing stocks, an increased amount of light and warmth, and all those nutrients that have been mixed up into the surface layer are now locked up there. And the result is a gigantic phytoplankton bloom. Okay, and that in essence is a spring bloom. Just how big are they? Well, here in the north, here's a shot from satellite of a spring bloom in the North Atlantic, and as you can see, they're big enough to photograph from outer space. So here is one of our satellite images of just chlorophyll A, and we can see that it's we get good strong evidence that it occurs seasonally. So these temperate seas occur along our latitudes in the northern hemisphere, and along the southern South America, northern parts of the Southern Ocean along in the southern hemisphere. And you could see that in December of 1997, which was during our winter, the chlorophyll A is suppressed a little bit, except for where we have some coastal upwelling. We always have some growth along the equator because of equatorial upwelling, but chlorophyll A is generally repressed up here. But in our winter, it is the summer for the southern hemisphere, right? Our northern winter is southern summer. And so you could see that along these temperate seas we have gigantic blooms, tons and tons of chlorophyll in the surface ocean. Right. In June of '98, approaching our summer, we get the northern summer. And you see that the chlorophyll A is a little bit suppressed in the Southern Ocean, although we still get Antarctic upwelling, right, and coastal upwelling during coastal upwelling events. But you could see that equatorial upwelling is picked up a lot. But look at all this lit up in the northern hemisphere, right, because all these seas are subject to this destratification and then restratification and the triggering of a spring bloom. And really, that's about it. That wraps it up. Thanks for joining me. See you next lesson.